Kwity, a couple weeks ago, I had a chance to talk to Eddie McGilvra, pass rush coach who worked with you and a number of guys. He said that you had probably the best offseason of any player who he's worked with, period. That's physically, that's mentally. What went into your offseason? How are you feeling?
I think, me this offseason, just hearing guys like AD and like other greats talk about giving it all to the game. And I wanted to make sure once the season was over, like, I gave it my all. And, going into the offseason, that's where the season starts. That's where we prepare for the season. So for me, man, I was doing like 4 or 5 workouts a day. I was doing, extra cardio in the morning. I was doing the lift and D-line work, then Pilates and hot yoga and PT and, just making sure I stay on top of it, make sure I'm ready to go. I lost 15 pounds and I gained some muscle, so that's the hard thing to do. And, it was a great off season for me mentally, physically. I'm just ready to go. I'm excited to go. I'm ready to go out there and play.
Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Your guys, Cody and Derek, back for another one, guys. We got to talk about Indianapolis Colts defensive lineman Kwity Paye. Now, Kwity Paye, it's been well documented at this point, Derek. Kwity Paye has had a tremendous offseason from what people have said, right? So, according to defensive line coach Eddie McGilvra, who is the unofficial trainer of Kwity Paye, he also works with Laiatu Latu. He claims that Kwity Paye has had an offseason unlike pretty much any he's ever seen, Derek, which is definitely quite interesting. And, Kwity Paye, definitely a guy that, needed to have this type of offseason. So, kind of talking about it when it comes to what Eddie had to say about Kwity Paye specifically, kind of talking about, especially when in terms of, his pass rush ability, right? And we've already seen it so far through camp, Derek. We've seen Kwity Paye have a couple nice days. And so I kind of wanted to talk about, react to kind of some of his comments and just overall thoughts on Kwity Paye when it comes to, what the Colts are looking for from him. And, obviously what he needs to do here in a pretty big season for him. Now, I will say Kwity Paye has dropped 10 to 15 pounds this offseason and bulked up, right? So he's definitely transformed his body in a lot of different ways from what we've seen when it comes to him. He was talking about just how it's been a great offseason for him mentally and physically and how he's ready to go, ready to rock. And obviously we know, Derek, that, Kwity Paye has been a guy that, hasn't been a crazy sack guy so far with the Indianapolis Colts, but he definitely has appeared to do a lot this offseason to train his body to get himself right to potentially be a part of this team's future. And, obviously picking up the 5th-year option, I think gave him even more confidence in what he can become as a pass rusher, right? And obviously the Colts believe that Kwity Paye can take it to another level in some capacity by handing him all those guarantees with picking up that 5th-year option. So what are your reactions, Derek, to what Coach Ed has said, to what Kwity Paye has said, and just kind of the expectations for Kwity going in here to a really big season for him?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely awesome to see that Kwity has really taken that initiative. And I mean, it's very telling of a player that is willing to look in the face of adversity and tell himself that, hey, like, there's some things that I need to work on rather than running away from the problem. Like, we know that Kwity Paye, obviously, he had his 5th-year option picked up. So clearly he's not going anywhere after this year, but there's no guarantee of what happens after the 2025 season. So Kwity has to get a jump on this now, and especially since that the Colts just drafted Laiatu Latu potentially to replace you. So coming into this, there's a lot of high expectations for you to pick up the slack. And so Kwity Paye not only improves himself, but loses a few pounds, really started bulking up, which is an insanely great thing because that's something that Kwity Paye needed, to be a little faster. I think that's what would be great for Kwity Paye, to not only be stronger, but also be faster in the same breath, because I think that could really help his game to get around some of those bigger right tackles that he has to go up against in the NFL. And of course, Coach Ed, a lot of people will be like, who the heck is that guy? Well, listen, he's a guy that has worked with a lot of really good defensive linemen. And some of the most recent ones, he was working with Khalil Mack a few weeks ago as well. Khalil Mack, who might end up being a potential Hall of Famer one day, has talked about how many, top defensive linemen that he's had the privilege of coaching throughout this time of him being a coach for NFL prospects. And, for him to go out there and say, of anyone this offseason that I have seen take a jump, Kwity Paye is for certain the best one. I mean, that's saying a lot, Cody. I mean, and this guy works with a lot of dudes. And for him to say that Kwity Paye has made the most noticeable difference, there has to be something different with Kwity Paye going on here. And people have said he's looked really good. Coach Ed saying he's looked really good. Obviously, body-wise, he's slimmed down a little bit. So, and if that's any indication of what we can see from Kwity Paye, obviously the dedication's there. But the big question remains, Cody, can he put it on the field and can he be more efficient?
That's the big question with Kwity. And a couple other comments that Kwity had made in regards to last year and kind of the offseason workout that he's made. So he did 4 or 5 workouts per day, Derek, during this offseason to train his body to where it needed to be. Right? I mentioned he dropped about 10 to 15 pounds. He did the cardio, and he was doing all he could to get his body in that certain way. And he last year obviously was 265. So he has definitely transformed himself with the cardio stuff. And it's interesting to say it, Derek, because Kwity Paye was pretty honest about last season when, he felt like at times he could feel his weight. He definitely felt like there was times last year where he felt like he was too heavy. He felt his weight later in games. And he was like, man, I feel like I can be performing a lot better than I currently am right now. And that's why he really took this approach to get faster, to lose weight, to work on his cardio, to do all these things to make sure he's on the field more. Because obviously last year, Derek, we know Kwity Paye got benched for Tyquan Lewis on third downs, right? And so it's something that is quite interesting that Kwity now, he understands, I got to be able to not just be a great run defender, which, by the way, he's a really good run defender for an edge, but he's got to be able to be consistent in getting after the passer. That's the big thing for Kwity. And so I think that's kind of the biggest question mark, obviously, is just the consistency standpoint. Can Kwity do it? And I think that's a good first step for him to work on his cardio, to be out on the field and not be gassed, in the fourth quarter, and be able to be a guy that can be a consistent 3-down player and just feeling like he's going to be completely confident, in who he is and how he's going to perform this season. I mean, Derek, if he can keep up how good he's been at stopping the run and then add some more juice at getting after the passer, I mean, talk about a Colts defensive line that already has a lot of talent. I mean, if Kwity Paye can actually be a competent to good pass rusher, I mean, holy cow, that's going to just elevate this Colts defensive line so much more than it already currently is, which is just crazy to even think about. A defensive line that, was a top team in terms of sacks last year, although albeit weren't great at consistently getting after the quarterback, but added Laiatu Latu. If Kwity Paye, a guy who I think a lot of people has just written off, if he can step it up and surprise a lot of people after getting after the quarterback and being effective, I mean, Derek, talk about one of, if not the best defensive lines in all the NFL. I really think the Colts, if Kwity Paye can make a leap like that, I really do believe that's going to be something where you look at this Colts defensive line and you say, wow, this is a unit that is crazy good.
Yeah, and especially because, unfortunately, knock on wood, there's going to be that occasional injury that happens from time to time. And it's so important to have those depth players that when you take your starters off the field that can actually fill that role. So if Kwity Paye and Laiatu Latu are both in a situation where they both can be relied upon on pass rush, on passing downs, and You have a guy like Dio Adangbo who can fill that role very well on the outside as well, or even on the inside. It becomes so much easier as a defensive coach and as a defensive line coach to not have to worry as much about how long you're keeping guys off the field, how you're substituting and all of that stuff, because you got one or two guys on that bench that can come right in and still do the exact same thing as before. So if Kwity Paye just ultimately got more efficient at his job than what he already was, then this is going to be great. It's going to be great for Latu. It's going to be great for this offensive line that has to practice against it. And it's just overall great for the overall effect of the defensive line to have another player like Kwity Paye, who is already a solid player, to then become an even more dangerous player.
And I think it proves the Colts right then, too. It's like they were justified in picking up that fifth-year option for Kwity if he can show noticeable improvement this year at getting after the passer on a consistent basis. So that is definitely something that's going to be huge. And I liked what you said about, with Coach Ed and what he was talking about with Kwity. He works out with a lot of guys, including, mind you, multiple Colts defensive linemen that he works out with. And for him to just basically say, not just basically, but for him to go out there and say Kwity Paye has had one of the best off seasons that I've ever seen, right? That I've ever seen out of a guy, which is crazy. He said he's had the strongest off season of anybody I have ever trained. And so a guy like Coach Ed, he doesn't just say that to say that. Kwity must have had just this crazy, crazy off season to be able to be who he is now and to catch the eye and have Coach Ed say that. That's just crazy. So hopefully that translates to the field for the Indianapolis Colts. And if that does, like we talked about, this defensive line is going to be scary, man. I mean, you already have guys who can get after the passer. Now, if you can add a little bit more from your former first-round pick, and he's putting all the work in to do it, I mean, the sky's the limit for this defense. I really do believe that for this defensive line. So, guys, let us know your thoughts, though, when it comes to this defensive line from Kwity Paye and what he has done this offseason, the work that he's put in. Let us know all those things in the comments down below. But, guys, that'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for tuning in. We greatly appreciate it. And as always, guys, go Colts.